Throughout my time browsing the YouTube platform over the past few years, something I've noticed is how prevalent group channels have become on the site. Groups such as the Sidemen, Beta Squad, FaZe, and many others were at one point at the top of YouTube, gaining millions of views per upload, and developing loyal audiences that would watch just about everyone in the group and anything they did. But over time, many of these channels would start to completely die out, with people completely moving on from what these YouTubers were doing, such as the case with FaZe Clan. And some other channels would completely collapse on themselves due to private drama that broke up the entire group, such as Team Crafted and Lunch Club. But the case we're talking about today, with the channel Misfits, is much more disgusting than that. If anyone's been paying attention, you might have noticed that this group channel has been pretty much inactive since the beginning of 2023. You might assume that it could just be something normal, like creative differences that drove the group apart, but that is far from the case. This video is the story of the Misfits' former manager, Ryan P., and how he misused his position in the group and the content scene in general to do some pretty indefensible things, causing the entire group to collapse in the process. So with that out of the way, join my Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want more content like this, and let's get right into the video. Now, this section will mainly be explaining how Ryan P took advantage of his position in the Misfits to do some pretty bad things, to say the least. But before I get into that, I feel like it's important to get into some brief backstory about the Misfits themselves, just so we can understand how Ryan got into this position in the first place. Although, just a short disclaimer, I'm not going to be going as in depth as I did with the Lunch Club video, simply because this video isn't supposed to be a deep dive or anything. So let's get into it. The Misfits are a content group that spawned from a couple of CSGO YouTubers who were all seemingly in the same friend group, and made videos with each other. The members of the group consisted of Fitz, Swagger Souls, Toby on the Telly, McCreamy, Zuckles, and I Notorious. And they were mostly known for doing the funny moments type of videos whenever it came to CSGO. But that type of content is not at all what they did on the group channel. It was completely different. The videos on the Misfits channel itself were seemingly random and didn't really stick to doing one type of content. It was just whatever they wanted. You could have a camping video to trying out stand-up comedy to causing a riot for some reason. It didn't really matter what type of video it was. They could just make what they want if they thought it was funny. Coupled with a podcast and other business ventures, the Misfits as a group were pretty successful for a while, gaining millions of fans at the time that they were on the platform. There didn't seem to be much reason for the group to fall apart anytime soon, but little did people know that behind the scenes, there were some pretty shady things going on, to say the least. So now that we have this backstory as to what Misfits is and how the YouTube group came to popularity, I think it's finally time we talk about Ryan P. As I've already mentioned before in this section, Ryan was the Misfits manager, and due to him being the manager of such a big YouTube group, he used his power there in some pretty nefarious ways, to say the least. There's some stuff that he did regarding a merch scandal as well with a company that he was running, but since this video is mainly focusing on the Misfits, I won't be talking about that specifically, and I'd recommend you to watch CoffeeZilla's video if you want to know about that. Instead, I'm going to be covering the many allegations that have come out against Ryan P, most of which seemingly happened because of his role as the Misfits manager. So let's get into it. The first allegation that came out was made by the Twitter user Peckett on November 26, 2022. And I'll read out the first half of their statement here for context purposes so that everyone can get the gist of what I'm talking about here. So here's what's in the post. Throughout my time working with the Misfits and their merch company, I was continually put into extremely uncomfortable situations with Ryan and made to partake in sexual acts which I could only ever agree to after being coerced. Told I would get to live with my friends, taken on overseas trips, or made a money offer I wasn't in the position to refuse as I was underpaid and never paid on time. I've witnessed him perv on his employees in the shower, break into clients' phones to search for private photos, take advantage of men who he has given way too much alcohol and drugs. He uses his money and influence to manipulate vulnerable people into fulfilling his sexual desires. So let's sum up what we've heard here. According to Peckett, Ryan allegedly uses a position in the Misfits to take advantage of people in a sexual way. This is a pretty concerning thing if true, but there's just one issue with this at the time: lack of evidence. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that Peckett is lying, and knowing what was revealed later on, they were most likely telling the truth. But if we just look at this in a vacuum to when this was released in late 2022, there wasn't much at the time that backed up their statements. Peckett never provided anything to prove their claims back when their initial tweet about the situation came out, and there wasn't really a trend of similar allegations coming out against Ryan yet at the time. I feel like something could have actually been done about this guy way earlier if there was some evidence attached here instead of just testimony, because as much as I want to be sympathetic here, the truth is that word of mouth is never going to be enough to go off of. You have to have at least something, but that's just me speaking in hindsight, knowing what would come out after the fact. Over the next few months after this came out, the Misfits YouTube group would go almost completely inactive, with the last upload on their main channel being on February 8th, 2023, meaning that they've been completely inactive for over a year now, and it wasn't exactly clear why the group stopped making content up until October of 2023. Several more allegations came out against Ryan, with very similar behavior to the Peckett story that we just covered, along with the fact that fellow Misfits members Fitz and Swagger Souls liked the tweets containing the allegations against Ryan, instantly giving us more credibility than it had before. After these stories came out, Ryan would deactivate his Twitter account and completely disappear from the public eye, making himself look way guiltier than before. To be fair to Ryan here, there wasn't a lot of hard-hitting evidence at the time that he did this stuff, but the fact that there were 3 independent allegations against him and that he deactivated his account after the ones we just talked about, yeah, things weren't looking too good here, and things would only get worse when CoffeeZilla came into the picture. I'm just realizing while scripting this that this is my 3rd video where CoffeeZilla is a major player here. That's kind of funny to me. Now back to the video. CoffeeZilla would end up getting involved in the story due to the merch company, Revolt, that Ryan was running. But what he found halfway through investigating was everything I've discussed in this video, plus more. Now, I can't include everything that Coffee put into his video, as I would just essentially be stealing the work that he did for his story. I'll leave a link to his video in the description as well for anyone curious about this whole thing, but for now, I'll summarize exactly what he found here. Through this video, Coffee found actual evidence of Ryan abusing his power as the Misfits finisher, through certain DMs on sites like Twitter, PayPal receipts, and more people messaging him with their experiences privately. So I think we could say for the most part that Ryan is likely guilty of most of what he's accused of. I think the fact that someone like this was running such a big YouTuber group does make me feel a bit uneasy. And while him being outed doesn't change what happened in the past, at least Ryan isn't in such a high position of power anymore. Now, this would normally be the end of a video like this. Ryan abused his power as a manager of Misfits and was eventually outed, and is no longer in the industry. This seems like a closed book, honestly. But there's something we haven't looked at yet, which is the Misfits members themselves. How much did they know about what Ryan was doing? Something that I wanted to address throughout this video before I conclude everything is the Misfits as a group, and what everybody knew about Ryan's actions before they got outed publicly. But before I begin this section, I want to give a quick disclaimer. Everything that I talk about here is purely based on my own speculation, and this section has the potential to be the most poorly aged thing about this video as time passes. The story still has the potential to change, and more things might be revealed about the whole thing after this point, so I'd recommend taking this section with a grain of salt, and keep in mind that most of this isn't necessarily based on hard-hitting evidence. But anyways, I've seen people wondering what exactly the Misfits members knew about what Ryan was doing behind the scenes. If you go to YouTube and look at the comment section of the most recent Misfits video, most of the comments are about the recent Ryan stuff and about how the members probably knew what was happening behind the scenes. This might just be me assuming good faith in people, but in my opinion, I don't think that anyone in the group had knowledge of most of this stuff going on regarding Ryan. Or if they did have any knowledge of it, they probably didn't know the full extent of what exactly he did. And I have a few reasons for this that I'll go over here. First off, let's look at the timeline of events for everything. An allegation I didn't mention in the previous section, due to it being the most irrelevant thing to come out about Ryan, was Noah Hugbox's statement. He was the first one to speak out about Ryan, with a twitlonger called Game Over. I've talked about my many issues with this twitlonger twice before, and to be fair, I am biased against Noah due to a lot of things I'm not going to mention here, but to sum up exactly why I had an issue with this statement, Noah didn't provide evidence for any of what he was talking about here. It's like he just expected people to take him at his word, and that's it. So with that in mind, it makes sense why the group didn't exactly take immediate action against Ryan. I'm not saying that Noah was exactly lying about what went on, but when you have absolutely nothing to back up what you're talking about, I don't think it should be just taken at face value. And again, it makes perfect sense why the group didn't distance themselves by this point. The same thing applies to the Peckett statement that we discussed earlier, although to a lesser extent considering what we know now. An interesting thing to note here, however, which I didn't touch on in my last section, is that at the end of Peckett's statement about Ryan, they claim that the Misfits were aware of some of the actions and chose to look the other way. But the problem with this is that Peckett never provided any evidence that any of the Misfits members knew about this stuff behind the scenes, let alone any evidence that Ryan was actually actually being predatory. So this does make me personally doubt that they knew as much as what people were letting on behind the scenes. But to give Peckett the benefit of the doubt here, since they were seemingly right about Ryan, and for the sake of the argument, let's just say that hypothetically, the Misfits members did in fact know about these allegations behind the scenes. Considering that there wasn't any proof at the time for what Ryan did that was just put out publicly, I think they probably just didn't have enough in order to feel like they had to distance themselves, so they didn't kick him out at the time, which honestly makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think someone should be kicked from their position based solely off of an allegation that has nothing else backing it up, so if anything, I just see it as them being careful. You can call them negligent if you want, but to me, I don't think they did anything wrong here. Plus, again, everything here is a hypothetical. It is not confirmed to have happened. And lastly, I want to talk about the recent allegations against them that surfaced, the CoffeeZilla investigation, and the support that the Misfits members showed for the victims of everything. In October of 2023, multiple people came out with allegations against Ryan P, with the actual tweets being liked by members of the Misfits group, implying that they went their separate ways with Ryan and supported the victims. And this to me is one of the biggest pieces of evidence that they didn't just stay with him while knowing that he was some monster. And there's more than just this as well. When CoffeeZilla did his investigation into Ryan P, don't you think that he would have found out if the Misfits members knew what Ryan was up to but didn't say anything? Instead, he was seen nearly 2 months before his video even came out, thanking the Misfits members for being in support of the victims in a Twitter thread he made. So if he was talking behind the scenes with people involved and didn't feel the need to mention that people in the group might have been complicit in this whole thing, then there's likely a chance that they didn't know much at all. Now, of course, all of the things being alleged in this section are heavily based on my own speculations of what happened, based on what's publicly available. So take it with a grain of salt, and I will make a follow-up if anything new comes to light regarding what I just talked about, but for now, I think I'm done with this topic. Moving on. The Misfits story is something that's pretty sad to me, to be honest. Imagine making a YouTube group with some of your friends just to make content together, only for it to all fall apart due to someone you had managing everything. It makes me feel a great bit of sympathy to everyone who was a part of Misfits. I'm not saying they're all 100% innocent and didn't know about what Ryan did. There is a chance that they knew about all the things going around Ryan and didn't care, but I haven't seen any evidence of that, so we can't really say that. There's also the chance that the members of Misfits were pretty negligent when it came to handling this whole thing, but even with that, I can still sympathize with them. Ryan was likely somebody they considered a friend judging by podcast clips I've seen, so they likely didn't want to jump the gun immediately, which makes sense to me honestly. And I'd say that they made the right choice in the end. But this does bring up an important point throughout this entire thing. Be careful who you work with. This is probably a super obvious statement, but considering who was running the group, I felt like this needed to be said. But with that, I think I can end the video off here. Thanks for watching this video. I just launched a Patreon page, so if any of you want to support me on there, it will be much appreciated, but don't feel pressured to do so. It's mainly just to support me financially and doesn't really include any extra content at the moment, so don't feel obligated to do anything. And I have my biggest video yet coming out within the next few weeks, so stay tuned for that. I've been working on and off on it since October, and I just hope that people will enjoy it. And with all of that being said, I'm done with this video. Oh yeah, one last thing. #FLM.